Every hero's journey starts before anything dramatic happens. Life appears ordinary, but something feels off. You may feel slightly misaligned with social norms, more sensitive to noise, emotion, contradiction, drawn to patterns, symbols, meaning, uncomfortable with rigid systems, shallow explanations, or performative identities. In many prophetic texts, this is called the time before the end. In psychological language, it's simply the stage where the old operating system no longer fits the complexity of the environment. Nothing's wrong yet, but the signal-to-noise ratio is degrading. This isn't pathology. It's often increased perception without an interpretive framework. The call to adventure, the prophecy appears. Prophecy enters when language tries to describe transition. End-time narratives, apocalypse revelations across cultures share one function: to describe what it feels like when a worldview is no longer viable. Apocalypse doesn't mean destruction, it means uncovering. So what's uncovered? The illusion of performance, the false separations, the identities built on survival rather than coherence. Like a computer issuing a system warning. This software cannot support the next update. The prophecy is not about the world ending. It's about a mode of interpretation ending. At this stage, many people think, why do I feel different? Why do I see things others ignore? Why doesn't the usual advice work for me? Prophetic language historically framed this as a temptation, a trial, a sin, darkness. Modern language sees it as anxiety, overthinking, sensitivity, burnout. Both are incomplete. From a systems perspective, this is a nervous system receiving more data than its current schemas can integrate. What feels like overwhelm, dissociation, too much thinking, can, when properly framed, become pattern recognition, emotional intelligence, intuitive synthesis. The weirdness, it's often untrained signal, not malfunction. In myths, the mentor doesn't give power. They rename what's already happening. Here's the reframe. What prophetic texts call judgment, psychology calls feedback. What they call collapse, systems theory calls phase transition. What they call death, biology calls apoptosis, program clearing so new growth can occur. Nothing here requires belief, only pattern recognition. This is the most misunderstood stage. The dark night is not punishment. It's the withdrawal of borrowed meaning. Old motivators stop working. Fear, approval, status, external certainty. Plato's cave fits here perfectly. You're not punished for leaving the cave. Your eyes simply hurt when exposed to unfiltered light. This is where prophetic language becomes dramatic because identity is dissolving. Old maps no longer orient behaviour. The nervous system's recalibrating. This is often when people feel lost, unanchored, temporarily unproductive, spiritually or existentially offline. In myth, it looks like chaos. In neuroscience, it looks like plasticity. Trials, allies and enemies. Reinterpreting the spiritual warfare. Symbolically, enemies, they're outdated habits, environments, beliefs. Demons, they're feedback loops you haven't decoded yet. Allies, they're environments, language, practices that stabilize coherence. The real battle isn't good versus evil. It's coherence versus fragmentation. What some texts call temptation is often short-term regulation, competing with long-term alignment. What some call possession, it's often identity fragmentation under stress. When understood, these aren't curses. They're training data. The abyss, the death, the apocalypse, the end. Here the prophecy always says the same thing. Everything ends. But note what ends. A false self, a borrowed narrative, a rigid identity, a survival-based worldview. This is the death of the old hero, like a system reboot. Memories preserved, functions are optimized, redundant processes are cleared. The world doesn't end. The lens through which the world is interpreted ends. The return of sight. After the abyss, perception simplifies. Not because reality is simpler, but because unnecessary overlays drop away. Common experiences, clearer boundaries, less tolerance for incoherence, more discernment, less reactivity. The ability to sense when something is off without dramatizing it. Prophetic language calls this the awakening, the resurrection, the new heaven, the new earth. But in grounded terms, you're no longer outsourcing meaning. You're orienting from internal coherence. The hero doesn't stay on the mountain, they return to work, to relationships, to society, but differently. The gift isn't power, it's translation. You become someone who can hold complexity without panic, reframe fear into information, stabilize environments through presence, recognize that separation is often just a labeling error. This is how prophetic language becomes service, not spectacle. Here, precision matters. Many capacities labelled as intuition, psychic sensitivity, channeling, frequency shifts. They're better understood as pattern sensitivity, emotional resonance, somatic intelligence, non-linear cognition. These are human capacities, unevenly distributed, context-dependent, and trainable. They require grounding, ethics, humility, and rest. Without those, they become destabilizing narratives rather than useful skills. The larger arc. If one resists this journey, the system stays overloaded, anxiety externalizes, meaning collapses into cynicism or dogma. If one engages it, slowly and grounded, all limitations reconfigure into strengths. Sensitivity becomes discernment. Difference becomes specialization. Neither path is moralized. Both are just feedback loops. Prophecy, when stripped of time-bound fear, is simply a story about transition. The end isn't an ending. It's a clearing of incompatible structures. And the hero's journey isn't about becoming special. It's about becoming coherent enough to contribute without distortion.